What a time it is to be alive and to work from anywhere. I've seen it myself. Anyone fancy working from the Kavatsky beach up in Bulgaria? Well, companies like HubSpot are definitely saying yes. Companies like Airbnb, they've nearly doubled the amount of visitors to their careers website since they announced their work from anywhere policy. But of course, you got to be careful. Some companies are not open to, for example, digital nomads. Thankfully, there are great resources available. We had a wonderful show there yesterday on the Benivo Bites. I highly recommend anyone take a look at that show. Brian did a wonderful job there. There are other resources that we have available as well, such as, for example, a Work From Anywhere series. Great one a couple of weeks ago was with Rena Montalvo, where she more or less said, work from anywhere policy, don't call it that. Some other good resources as well, such as a remote work tax matrix blog post we published a couple of weeks ago, where we kind of break it into, for example, a hire from anywhere tax matrix, looking at the different options of how you can hire from anywhere. Look at the explosion, for example, EORs. I like, for example, how they do it in Hopin as well. Make it clear from the get-go what are the different hiring mechanisms. But then you've also got temporary international remote work, which we call work from anywhere. Companies like Publicis, look at their policy. It's fascinating to see. Then you've got obviously the list of companies that allow work from anywhere. We put together a blog post during the week. You've got some interesting examples there. And then also look at what's going on in the wider travel industry. American Airlines, in their recent quarterly announcement, basically said pre-pandemic about 25% of travelers were what they call mixed between business and leisure, whereas now it's between 50 and 55%. Well, let's get into today's episode. Looking forward to having Bhagyashree, Brian and Becky on to discuss this further. You're very welcome to today's episode. We are delighted to have you all here today. And we would love to let us know where you're coming in from. What part of the world are you joining today's episode from? Please let us know in the comments. And I guess without further ado, we'd love to bring on our three fantastic guests, Becky, Bhagyashree, and Brian. First of all, thank you all so much, the three of you, for being on today's episode. Maybe good to give our audience a little bit of an intro, give us a bit of background to yourselves. Becky, maybe you'd like to kick us off.
Great. Thanks, John, and great to be here today with everyone. I'm Becky Woods. I oversee the global mobility and U.S. immigration programs at ADP. We are a U.S. headquartered company based in Roseland, New Jersey, right outside New York City. I've been in the global mobility industry a little over 16 years. I started out on the RMC side at Prudential, now BGRS. I moved to an international HR consulting firm that specialized in expat payroll, and then made the switch over to the corporate side, first at News Corp, and now I've been at ADP a little over 5 years. So very happy to be with everyone today.
And delighted to have you on. Of course, Becky's in the top 250 global mobility leaders in the world, according to Benivo. Bhagyashree, another person on the awards, named in one of the top 30 female lawyers in Asia recently. Bhagyashree, give us a bit more background to yourself and what you do.
Hello, pleased to be here. I'm Bhagyashree. I'm currently serving as the General Counsel for Lana Software GmbH. We're headquartered in Berlin, but our team is dispersed across the globe, and we are a fintech solution that also offer payroll, EOR, and contractor management solution. I've been in this industry for 11 years now, and I was one of the first lawyers to start talking about remote work law and international remote work. And the pandemic really kind of accelerated what I've been saying for the past 10 years. I'm actually looking forward to a very, very intellectual and nice discussion here with Brian and Becky.
Fantastic. Well, listen, maybe to kick us off, I guess, Brian, give us an intro to yourself. You do a fantastic show, the Benivo View from the Top. And on top of that then as well, you're obviously the global strategy director of Benivo. You've got so much experience in this particular space. Could you give us a bit of background to yourself and maybe paint us a picture as to how you've seen this evolution over the last couple of years?
Yeah, well, I suppose I've been in the industry for longer than most, which probably isn't a good thing. I've been in the industry for the best part of 40 years. I started off my career with some of the big four firms, most latterly as managing partner at EY in what was then called their human capital, now their people advisory services practice. I then set up something called the Forum for Expatriate Management, which hopefully many people in the audience will know fondly. And then since then, I joined Benivo, and I'm also with a company called Alta Vita in the corporate accommodation space. So I'm portfolio. And with the view from the top, I mean, this is just amazing for me to be the other side. I mean, normally I'm sort of
Yeah, that's true.
Humans like to explore. And what remote work is doing is taking that to the next level of saying, forget that old song, the 9 to 5. You don't have to do it. You can actually be somewhere else, in your case, Portugal, wherever you choose to be in the world. So the world is changing, I think, very much for the better. So I'm very, very optimistic.
But, it's funny you say that. I mean, it's been one of the big advantages of being around the kids at remote work and taking advantage of the pandemic. But we were working anyway before then, and being able to see like the first steps of the different kids. Actually, it killed me recently. We were away, and I was away at a meeting over in Prague, and I missed Barra, my youngest. He's only won his first steps, and it killed me from being so tight and so close and seeing every moment to then all of a sudden, being away. It was really tricky. But I think you make the really powerful point. It really is that mega trend beyond just work, goes right down to the very value set that's at the core of so many of us.
I would argue. I mean, the very first story in the Bible. I mean, how far back in history do you want to go? The very, very first story in the Bible is what? It's about Adam leaving the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
The very first, okay, you can laugh at him, but Adam was the first expat. Eve was the first trading spouse.
Love it. And then I think tying that into some of the more recent trends of recent weeks in Bhagyashree, can you tell us, I mean, there's been so much talk about this recent Airbnb work from anywhere policy. I know you're a straight shooter, you call it straight. You're quite direct on these kind of topics. Tell me, what are your thoughts on this recent Airbnb work from anywhere policy?
Well, I have to admit that this is one of the better policies out there. At least they're acknowledging that you have to stay in a particular jurisdiction 90 days or lesser, not to become a tax resident. But it's also very ambiguous. Like, come on, 170 countries in the world, and what if there's a senior leadership person who executes a very high potential sales contract on, let's say, a remote work visa? What happens to the corporate taxation there? I really think that these policies are very half-heartedly written, maybe not very thoroughly assessed when it comes to personnel, income tax, corporate taxation, any other additional taxation. Also, very, very ambiguous. I haven't come across any company's remote work policy that's actually taking into account the employment laws as well. Because the moment you start working from a different jurisdiction, you are no longer under the purview of your home country, but of the country where you're working from. And employment law, again, after taxation, is perhaps a big a black hole sort of a situation for companies, because different countries could have different employment law benefits, perks that a company needs to administer to the employees. And then what happens there? So I think Airbnb did a good job where they did say that, you cannot be staying more than 90 days and there's no permanent overseas working available until unless you have prior approvals and assessments done. But again, it's very ambiguous when it comes to a lot of policy.
I think to be fair as well, I mean, any of these companies, these big companies, they're surely looking at it on a country by country risk basis as well, and that it may not be 90 days in every single country. But the problem is these companies don't publicly publish the detail behind them, obviously. But maybe, Becky, could you walk us through how you deal with this in ADP? I mean, how do you tackle this in your organization?
Yeah. And again, I think that work from anywhere is so broad So I would want to break it down. I'd say within the US, long before COVID, we did have a policy where certain jobs could be home shored and you could have people working 100% remote and not tied to an office. So that's always been in place. We've also always had people who raised their hand and said, I'd like to go live and work in another country. Can I be a one-way permanent transfer? Will ADP accommodate that and hire me in that other country? And, where we've been able to and willing to, we've accommodated that as well. What came out of COVID was we put in place a temporary global remote worker policy where we allow associates to work up to 30 days in a 1-year period in another country with certain parameters, right? They have to have their own immigration right to work, things like that. And that policy, which we're referring to as guidelines, is still in place now. And in terms of kind of requests of, I want to go be in this country, on a permanent basis, but we don't have an entity there. I can't make you a one-way permanent transfer and hire you there. Those are very few and far between. And I think one reason is because our CEO, since the very beginning of COVID, always made the statement of, we are returning to office. It's just a matter of when. And so everyone kind of in the back of our head knew we would be called back. Last year, we started to roll out a 4-1 where it was going to be 4 days in office, 1 day at home. But then Omicron hit and numbers were still high in many places. So it wasn't rolled out a lot. But last April, we rolled out our 3-2 hybrid, so 3 days back in office. And there has been a big push to say, we expect you to be in the office. So I think, again, getting requests for people to not want to be in the office, like I said, they've been far and few between because we've set that expectation already.
Well, very good point. So if you look at it, you start with what's the remote work culture of the business, and then I guess the work from anywhere or international working policy is really an offshoot of that. But I guess it's not putting the cart before the horse. Just some investigation.
If I can just come in on that, John.
Go for it, yeah, Brian.
There's a really interesting question there. You talk about the culture, but it then raises the question: who is determining the culture? Is that being determined by the CEO saying, or the C-suite saying that this is what they want? Or actually, is it then going to be determined by the talent saying, well, actually, we're not going to put up with that. We want a different culture. So I think, we've got a bit of this war for talent thing going on. And if employers start finding that whilst they might say they want their people in 4 days a week, but actually they find they can't recruit people because people actually say, I'd rather do a job where I can be at home 4 days a week. I'll be at home 5 days a week. Then you might find that the culture changes. So I think we are in a real. I don't like the phrase "war for talent," but because a war sort of implies it's going to be over and someone's going to win, and this isn't going to be over. This is long term. But whatever that strife is between C-suite and talent, I think there's a balance of power struggle going on, and it may well be that over time, especially if we carry on with pretty much full employment, that actually, even if companies say they want you in, they're going to have to live with the reality, which is that the world has changed and that people like working from home.
I get you. No, a very, very valid point, Brian. And I guess one of the key things that comes back to is, not working in silos, I guess, and making sure global mobility are connected to recruitment and HR. That can see, for example, the people that are leaving the organization isn't like an inflexible remote work policy. One of the reasons, or work from anywhere policy, or we're not able to get the right talent because we haven't got the flexibility around that. That's one of the things. I presume you're hearing this as well. More and more companies are starting to pay attention to this. But in the meantime, very quick one, Brian. The audience have done a bit of investigation. I think Tyler said it was the same later for Avram, but then Susan says Eva didn't trail Adam. She actually accompanied him, apparently. So that's.
I think, I'm being picked up there by my friend Susan Ginsburg. Shout out to you, Susan. I called Eva a trailing spouse, and that's very sexist of me. But I've got a feeling that back in those days, they may not have been quite as sort of as woke as we are now. Back in those times. But you're quite right. She was an accompanying spouse.
But then the next question, coming back to on a serious note, how are you seeing this, Brian? How are global mobility leaders tackling this, and who is leading the charge? We had on the show yesterday. Is it mainly global mobility, or is it HR? Is it another function? How are companies tackling this in a kind of a broad brush?
Yeah, broadly, in terms of the research that we've done through Benivo and our Changemaker initiative and through the show, is it seems to be global mobility in about 55% of cases. And other than that, it's HR operations. Now, we've got to be a bit careful with our terms here, because what people are saying is if it's domestic, it tends not to touch global mobility so much. And a lot of work from anywhere is work from anywhere domestically.
That's true. Yeah.
Especially in larger countries like, the US and Australia. When it hits international, then mobility get more involved, quite rightly. And I think that's great for mobility professionals. I think the chance to step up and become more strategic, I think is a really great opportunity for mobility professionals. And the issue, of course, that all our mobility professionals and indeed HR operation professionals dealing with this is looking at the compliance issues and making sure that, the risk assessments are done before somebody goes to work from anywhere, and whether they've got a decision tree or whether they're using software to manage it. But they're finding some way of identifying the people who are doing this work from anywhere remotely.
That is a very good point, Brian. I know you've got a lot of knowledge on the technology space there. What technology tools are people using to either track people in that scenario and also look at the risks? There are some great solutions. You've got, I think, Tracker Software Technologies, Equus, the Big Four. What are the good technology solutions you're seeing out there to help with this?
Yeah, and I must say we're launching our own shortlist as well. So
brilliant.
There's that coming, and some of the Big Four are out there, and shout out to them and to some of the others that are out there. We had I think it was Siemens who we had on the show a few weeks back, and every time somebody goes on a business trip, let alone anything else, a business trip, they run them through their software, and I think they do something like 100,000 a year assessments to work out whether the person is allowed to go from a operational legal reason into that country where they want to go, or they're triggering something, whether it's a tax or an immigration problem. And I think we'll see more of that. Obviously, Siemens is an exceptional case with an exceedingly large number of business travelers. But I think we're going to see more of that, because that's the other side of the coin. I talked about this, this mega trend of people wanting to be more mobile. The other mega trend that we're seeing going the other way is countries wanting to protect their borders. And whether we've seen that with everything that went on in the States, especially during the Trump year, what went on in terms of Brexit, or in terms of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine at the moment, everybody's getting more and more concerned about their borders as well. And that's where the rubber meets the road, because you've got these two things going on in completely different directions, which is that employees want to work everywhere, but countries are beginning to say, well, we want to sort of protect our borders. And then you get other countries which are going the other way, which are other countries like, say, Estonia or somewhere, who are saying, come in, we want as many people as possible. They're trying to encourage immigration. So some countries are busy trying to discourage immigration, and others are saying, no, we'll have as many. We want digital nomads, please.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very, very good point. Some great questions coming in here from the audience. We'll actually do a little Q&A in about maybe 10 or 15 minutes from the audience. Bhagyashree, what are some of the legal pitfalls, the remote law pitfalls that you've seen over the last year or so?
I would actually start by the first one is the understanding that people have that you only have you trigger some risk, or you need to comply only when you hop the national boundaries of a country. So let's say if you go from Germany to Spain or Germany to Portugal, no. The moment there are so many countries, there are states in the US, there are so many countries in Europe, Switzerland, Italy, I think some of these other South. France is again an example where if you move from one city to another, there could be these risks of taxation, immigration, employment law changes. There are different jurisdictions. You come into the purview of the local one, and there could be it requires a whole sort of restructuring of your benefits, payroll, what laws you come under, everything. And this is a lot of people on the broader level understand, oh, this is domestic, but I've just moved from Paris to, let's say, south of France, or I've moved from Zurich to Bern. But the moment you move from Zurich to Bern, you are under different laws.
Of course, so I guess it comes down to if it's a unitary tax and legal structure, or is it like you look at the US, China, you look at even Canada, for example, or like you said, France. Yeah.
John, it's like 90% of the countries have different. Even in India, a lot of people believe that India is a very homogeneous, company where the laws are saying no. Personal income tax differs. It also differs from around where you come from. So if you are a identified scheduled tribe in India, maybe personal income tax may not apply to you. Then there are these professional taxes that vary from state to state. So that's what I'm saying. Like it's very location specific. And the first and foremost thing for everybody to understand is to understand that laws differ from one city limit to another city limit. It's just not the countries. And that's the second thing is when it comes to understanding what remote work is. And I think when I came on your show last year, I pretty much because it was fresh from a lawsuit that I was a part of. And what is remote work? It's a very ambiguous term. Are you working from home? Are you working at home? Are you working from different jurisdictions? What are you doing? Or is it hybrid? So it has to be defined very, very clearly in each company policy, what is allowed and what is not allowed. Right now, it's a remote work think of it as an umbrella term under which you can go and work from anywhere, digital nomadism, international remote work from office work.
That's a critical point, getting that right in the employment contracts, in the policies, defining what that term is, because remote work could, for some people, mean digital nomad, whereas others, remote work might be domestic remote work or can be more just within that state. Yeah.
Yes, and we had this case, the Munich Labor Court recently ruled that there is no fundamental right to work from overseas.
So explain that one. So basically, there was somebody who wanted to work from anywhere in Switzerland, but they're employed by a Munich employer. Yeah.
Yes, and she requested that because the company has this policy of remote work, I want to work from Switzerland, and it went into the labor court, and the court ordered that there's no inherent right to work from different jurisdiction. It was also a kind of a lash out of the company that you did not define remote work, what it is clearly, because it's ambiguous right now. Remote work, I can maybe work from Australia if I want to go from a beach in France. So you need to define it clearly. Secondly, there was this interesting case, which I haven't really followed up. I think the order must have was out yesterday. It was a very senior regional director of BNP Paribas. And she moved from Paris to south of France, where her family lived. And she requested an internal domestic transfer, and the bank refused, and she sued the bank. It's an ongoing litigation, so I'm unable to say what has happened. But it was very interesting where she said that, well, I have the right to work from a different location. These are reasonable accommodations. And the employer needs, like France has this law where, these reasonable accommodations have to be accepted or could be accepted by the employer. And she said, like, these are reasonable accommodations. I want to work from the family, from my family home. And the bank said,
I think you're raising such a great point there, because I think, most conversations I've been involved with have looked at this from a tax point of view, a personal tax point of view, an immigration point of view, a social security point of view, a corporate tax point of view. But actually, I don't think many people have looked at it from a labor law point of view. And I think, the labor law issues that you're talking about there are huge. And I think there's more out there. I mean, you've talked about, should somebody just be able to allow, why should they not be allowed? But, potentially there might be discrimination cases in there, that there's some indirect discrimination because maybe more women want to work from home than men. And if you're stopping them, is that indirect discrimination? The other thing I could see coming down the track is duty of care. What about if you're working from home and then you get, I don't know, a bad back because you haven't got such a good chair as you might have had in the office, or, or you have a problem, I don't know, heaven forbid, there's a fire in your home office. And you're in that. Whose responsibility is that then?
What you touched upon is such a painful nerve. Workplace safety and workplace, when you work from the home, it's your home office. Occupational safety is such a risk that companies haven't even started to understand. And we've had cases where there was this I personally, not Lano, but I had an independent case where an employee started to work from Zurich, And the Zurich city law mandates that if an employee is working from home, they have a weird calculation. They have a formula, and the employer is required to pay a part of the rent of the home or the flat where the employee is working from.
Well,
And
just look at,
all this.
go ahead. So one of the things just came on that as well, I'm seeing from the audience as well, Bhagyashree, is basically that you can obtain those new rights in the new country that you're in, something to really watch out for from Sophia. But one of the points that I just wanted to follow up with Becky, though, was around, there's a very, very good question here coming from, like, what risk-benefit methodologies are you finding useful? So maybe two questions for you, Becky, in one. Like, how do you weigh the risk with the benefits of implementing work finder policy or letting people go abroad or not? That's one question. And the related question is also on the risk benefit of, going, or the cost benefit of going to advisors. When do you decide to go to external employment law advisors or tax advisors? This can really add up very, very expensive very, very quickly. So how do you tackle those two elements?
Yeah, I think the kind of risk benefit methodology, I mean, that decision is going to come down to each different company culture. And when I talk to my corporate peers, some of them say, oh, corporate tax will let people work 30 days in any country. It doesn't matter that we have an entity there or not. Whereas others say, oh, no, my corporate tax team said, no way. Nobody can go work in that country. We don't have an entity there. And again, like what was mentioned earlier, some companies care if you work in a sales role, and some companies don't care if you work in a sales role. So I think it's a matter of when you're putting together these policies, what is your company culture? What is your risk tolerance? Have you looped in the right people at the different functions within your organization to make sure that you do have a true pulse on the risk tolerance, right? I can't make a decision in a vacuum that, yeah, it's okay, Joe Schmo can go work over there. No, I've got to consult with 20 other people in 20 other departments to make sure that that really is okay. And in terms of when are we choosing to go to external advisors to get that advice? It was interesting as when COVID first started, a lot of corporate peers we were working very closely with our immigration providers, with our tax providers, and there were some great resources on the internet that I would go to every single day. But I had professional colleagues of mine, and I started doing it as well, keeping a spreadsheet by country of everything that we had learned, because we started to see we'd get the same queries over and over and over again, and we could leverage, the information we had already gotten from our external advisors. And, at ADP specifically, we don't have a centralized budget for mobility. Our managers have to pay for all of their moves and all of the external advice that we get. So if we get a query and it's somewhere new or some quirky situation we haven't explored before, we'll sit down with the manager and say, if you really want to try and accommodate this request, we will need to go and get external support. Here's how much it's going to cost. Are you willing to pay for it?
So you're kind of pushing back the ROI decision, or that kind of the cost benefit analysis back to the line manager, I guess, no?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. And do you give them like a framework to help manage? I mean, that's quite tricky, like trying to define what is the ROI. I mean, like ultimately they've got to decide themselves, is this somebody who's an extremely important employee? Are they a high performer? Is this scenario something that there's a significant business benefit long-term for the company, whatever it might be, I guess. It's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah. And again, if it's something like, hey, I want to go work an extra 2 weeks in India while I visit my family there, that's easy. I've got that covered under my guidelines. I'll partner with the HR business partner for the group and say, as long as they're a good performer, the manager is supportive of it, no issues with time zone differences, fine, go for it. But if it is something like, I want to go work 100% in this other location, will you accommodate me? Yeah, I'm having consultations with the HR business partner saying, is it okay if that role is placed in another country? Is the manager okay that the entire team sits in the US and now you're going to have one person in Singapore? How is that going to look and feel? Is that okay? Is that okay with the business? Can finance deal with the chargebacks? It's going to have to get charged back to the US business. Is corporate tax okay with it? Do we have an entity there that we can appropriately employ them under? So we're giving that counsel to the HR business partner, who's then liaising with the manager. But then when it comes down to kind of compliance, the things I tell them I'm always checking personally that sits under my remit is immigration right to work, I partner with corporate tax for the PE risk, and then I'm checking on the company payroll compliance and then the individual income tax risk. That's what I'm personally responsible for.
Fascinating. So it kind of appears to me, if I was to think of two images, Becky, I think of like one, on the one hand, you're almost like an octopus with like these tentacles all over the place, cross-functionally in different departments managing it. And the other side of it is you're almost like a circus performer balancing about like 20 different balls in the air, trying to make sure they all land and that we don't have anything that blows up. So that's interesting. But I think one of the elements that came out earlier in the discussion to help with this, Brian, you mentioned about before, was that technology piece. And when we did a work from anywhere survey, in our white paper a couple of months ago, what blew my mind was basically you have a spectrum of people when it comes to technology. You have people that either manage it via Excel spreadsheets, which is pretty much most. And then you have a small cohort that have very sophisticated tools, technology tools to help manage and automate the different pre-trip compliance assessment, things like that. There wasn't too much in between. But what is your sense of that, and where's that development? And obviously, what your guys are doing at Benivo, you have a good understanding of that.
I'm convinced that we're going to see less spreadsheets and more technology. I mean, that's just the way the world works. And one of my bugbears is, and I've said this countless of times on the show and to clients, is it is crazy that we get better technology in our everyday life than we do in our work life. I mean, we enjoy better technology when we're ordering a pizza than we do when we're managing a relocation. You think about it.
It's the truth.
It's being tracked. You can see where it is all the way to your door. Okay, and we can't do that in our work life, and we would dream of being able to do that. So you knew where the immigration process was, or the tax process, or the relocation process, or indeed the assignee themselves. We don't have that form, and the technology is out there, and that's certainly at Benivo what we've been developing is that consumer grade technology. I mean, and that's been one of the big failures. I think.
Tell me more about Benivo. What kind of comes through as a philosophy for you in Benivo, and one of your success stories is being able to have that technology that's user friendly and it's not a big difficult beast to manage, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, our philosophy is that technology should be easy. I mean, it shouldn't be a big installation. It shouldn't take you 9 months to install or cost you hundreds of thousands to install. In the same way that if I want to go shopping online and I go to Amazon, I don't expect to have to install Amazon software. I just go online, I read the user reviews when I'm making my decision, I buy it, and then it gets tracked on all the way. And if there's and there's great customer service in the case that I do have a problem. It says, and I mean, Mena's make the point that it needs human involvement. It absolutely does. But this is not, to my mind, this is not an and/or discussion. This is not, technology or people. It's technology and people.
And people. Yeah, great point.
And it should be there. The people should be there to do the strategic stuff. I mean, you used the analogy, John, of people being so busy juggling all the balls that, they don't know what to do. Well, there's a simple answer to that. Put some of the balls down and just juggle the ones that you can juggle. And by putting them down, what I mean is you then use a smarter solution, whether that solution is outsourcing or technology, but you don't try and do everything yourself. You do the important stuff. And I think that's also one of the failings of mobility over the years, is that people have spent too much time doing what's urgent to focus on doing what's important. They spend too much time dealing with the fires, and they haven't actually then been able to do the strategic stuff. And the only way that our industry will get more strategic is if they can stop doing the urgent stuff that's actually not important and focus on the stuff that's really important.
Well, I think one of the driving factors related to that evolution is that if you think of pre-pandemic, business travel was looked after by the business travel department. Expats were looked after by global mobility, but it was not a very big number of people typically. I know the likes of Siemens had quite a lot of movement, for example, but most companies had not a huge global mobility team, not a massive amount of people traveling as expats. Whereas now, if you look at that, work from anywhere space, people going for more than 7 days, less than 365 days, there seems to be a greater number of them, greater volume. It's going to push people to try and automate what they can, especially as things are opening up after COVID. So I think it really just reinforces the point that you made, Brian. But come back to you then, Bhagyashree. I'm conscious here, one of the questions coming here from Zishan was that great discussion. The labour law, tax and insurance implications are frequently missed in the public discussion. And in relation to Brian's point, consumer grade experience are missing in HR tech in general. So that's interesting, why not just global mobility, but HR tech in general. But coming back to Zishuan's comment here, Bhagyashree, what are some of the countries that are maybe the easiest or strictest to when it comes from hiring from anywhere? I mean, you obviously work with Lano, employer of record. What are the countries that are easiest or most difficult to do a hire from anywhere? Any particular countries, an example that maybe jump out to you as being extremely strict, for example, from contract and classification?
I would say any country in the European Union. European Union is a very risky jurisdiction. So European Union tops my list. It's very, very complicated. I wouldn't say there's any country that is really easy, but what I've started to see is that there's the disparity of where these people who want to work from anywhere coming from. And these are generally North Americans or Western Europeans who want to move to cheaper countries, Southeast Asia, I think South America, like where, you know, the cost of living is not very high and the currency conversion really makes them go into the top 1% earners in the country. And this is where the problem is, because while we are talking about how remote work is going to create this equitable platform for workers across the globe, there is so much of discrimination when it comes to employees from different countries, which are not, like, I would say, third world or developing economies, so to speak. I think that's a better term, because these countries may or may not have double taxation treaties. They may not have preferential or expedited immigration. You know, they're not in the favorable workforce. So like immigration for them is a lot of chaos. Maybe you would never get it. And then when these people actually work from, let's say, an American company, and when, let's say, if there's a company called ABC and they have this policy that you can work from anywhere, these people on company-sponsored visas are automatically barred from availing that policy. That's discrimination. And there's nothing you can do, because that's how the immigration laws work, because you're in a company-sponsored visa. We cannot ask you to leave the US, or if you are in the process of getting your citizenship, if you're on green card, you cannot change your home address. I think Becky would be a better person because she deals with it, but you cannot be changing your address, or like there are certain things that bar you. So I am not seeing that remote work in general is, even when you come to these digital nomad visas, John, you know this very well. You've done a lot of work in this. Look how these digital nomad visas also discriminate. You need to, let's say, earn more than $5,000 every month to apply for the visa in Iceland. Now, a person living in India or Southeast Asia may not earn $5,000 a month. You're just attracting high income people or top earners. Same with the visas in the Caribbean islands.
So there's kind of like an inbuilt discrimination into, in some cases, these digital. Yeah, no, it's absolutely,
Everybody's attracting Western Europeans and North Americans, but not the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is automatically getting barred.
Yeah, valid point. And I think, I mean, going back to that, in looking at contract and classification, looking at the visa rights, things like that, absolutely crucial to watch out for. But then kind of coming back to maybe, in a way, the beginning of the conversation. I mean, Brian and Becky, your CEO comes in the morning and says, we want to have a work from anywhere policy. Like, where do you even start? There's so much complexity here. We've talked through so many different risks, different countries. Even in some countries, it's down within the state level or beyond that, for example. Like, where do you even start? Any of you want to jump in on that?
Well, I was going to say, I think it goes back again to defining what does that mean for your organization? Is it a temporary? Is it a permanent? Are we willing to only allow it where we have employing entities, or are we willing to partner with the PEO if we really want to retain the talent and they want to be in a location where we don't have an entity? So again, looping in all those different departments and the different stakeholders and decision makers on kind of putting those guardrails around it to then help develop the policy.
I get you. And Brian, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, what was the old Yogi Berra line is that, watch out for where if you don't know where you're going, the chances are you'll end up someplace else. And it's like that. You've got to start by trying to work out where you're trying to get to. How much flexibility do you want? I mean, what does work from anywhere mean? Does it mean within the country, or can it be international? How anywhere is anywhere? And on these policies, the CEO tends to come out like a Brian Chesky or someone, comes out with Airbnb, come out with a statement. And then you actually look at it. That Airbnb policy, from what's publicly available, there seems to be quite a lot of small print in there. So, for example, whilst you can work from anywhere, they also say, but you've got to be expected to attend in-site meetings. When they have team meetings. Well, you can't be quite anywhere if you've got to then turn up to an on-site meeting. It doesn't explain, who's going to bear the cost of you arriving at that meeting.
That's true. Yeah,
it also says we're going to have some form of level of consistency. And I think from memory, the implication is that everyone needs to work on Pacific Standard Time for their working hours. So again, you can work from anywhere, but you've got to stay on our time zone. So you can put all sorts of limits in there. And as we've talked about, a lot of companies will say, yes, you can work from anywhere, but for 30 days a year or 60 days a year or whatever they set. So I think it's a question of, setting out what you want in terms of the vision and then letting the rubber meet the road and say, okay, well, that's perfect. What is actually acceptable? And I think with all these things, the secret, I think, from a CEO's point of view, is to not let the great be the enemy of the good.
Of course.
So, if your vision is you want to have a place where you've got flexible working, if you go for perfect, it won't happen. You can't let people work anywhere. So you just got to get something which is as close to what you want as possible, and then suck it and see. And it's going to involve. I mean, this working from home, working from anywhere malarkey is relatively new. It's all built from the pandemic. I know people did it before the pandemic, but not like we do it now. I mean, if we'd been having meetings like this, 3 years ago, we wouldn't have been doing Zoom meetings or Team or Meets or something. It would have said, we'll fly over and we'll have a meeting and discuss it. That's all gone. I mean, Lenin once said that there are decades when nothing happens and weeks when decades happen. And that's what we've lived through. We've lived through a period when the world has changed and we're adjusting to a new normal. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of it now. But my guess is we go out 5 years and this debate we're having now, people will be saying, really? You're having that debate? I mean, it's just taken as a given that you've got a lot of flexibility in work.
Yeah, and I guess you'll always have people on both sides of the equation. You'll always have people that maybe are against it or for it. But I think you're probably right. It'll really settle down over the next couple of years. I will say as well, there's great chat going on, great discussion going on. I can't show all the comments. Some of them are lots of really good comments here. Very good stuff on Merrily on just the difference in working in your home, in your office in a country versus hire across borders, for example. Also seeing as well a good comment here as well from how can you benchmark the salary if you're a couple of months here and there as well. I haven't seen that question before, but again, a very valid one as well. Daniel Paulsma, massive opportunities in building the infrastructure that will be needed. I mean, I will kudos to the likes of Benivo as well and what you guys are doing on a lot of infrastructure around that already in the global mobility space as well, but the other opportunities. Another good point by Daniel as well. With the increase in demand for employee workations and hiring distributed workforces, are you seeing organizations stepping up with the necessary resources to support these activities? Maybe, Becky, could you feel free to jump in on that? And I know you've also, for example, had your ADP People at Work survey recently as well. Anything coming through, any key statistics around this topic that jumped out at you from all of that?
Yeah, no, it was a good report. I'd encourage everyone to at least look at the summary. Everything I looked at, though, kind of resonated and made sense. Things like 2/3 of the people polled would consider looking for a new job if they were told they had to be 5 days back in the office. 71% of people over the last year have contemplated a major career move, and really with a higher focus on personal well-being and life outside of the workplace. And a part of that, they said, is because they found the people that they surveyed, people are more stressed out. Which I think is something that kind of we see everywhere, even just kind of general customer service matters in our daily life. I mean, people are getting burned out. People are kind of needing a break. I refer to it as COVID apathy. And I think people, when they're looking, for something new, it's even something like a location change can give you that extra, you were locked down for so long. You need that little extra zest, an extra thing to look forward to. And I think a piece of that is changing physical location. When people are changing jobs, again, salary is a priority, but it's not the only thing that matters. So really people, right, looking holistically at their life and, there's always been in different cultures, do you live to work or do you work to live? And I think globally, we've all adjusted more to that, work is not the most important thing, or how do I better balance it within the rest of life's demands to make myself live a happier life?
Yeah.
So,
very, very well made, Becky. I'm conscious as well of leveraging Bhagyashree's experience specifically. You're in India right now. How can companies, specifically for India, we don't normally go into country-specific topics, we try to avoid them, but India does come up again and again and again with a lot of people requesting it. How do companies manage these risks in India? And then as you're on the topic, maybe tell us more broadly about employers of record as potential solutions within that.
Sure. Before I answer this, I actually wanted to pitch into what
Go for
Brian
it. Yeah.
brought up in terms of flexibility. And there's this very interesting court litigation going on in India where this company, an employee employed by an American company, is working from India, due to the pandemic, and he had the permission, and he's still asked to respect I think Californian working hours. So it's like he starts working at 11 at night India time, goes up to 10, I think morning 9, and he's working all night. And he recently sued the employer for depression, anxiety, and some sort of neurological damage, because his biological clock has gone wonky, and he's actually facing a lot of problems. And the court ordered, and I think it's kind of a landmark judgment, because honestly, I haven't seen anything like this before. I don't know, if anybody else has, and I would love to know. But the court ordered that when you are in India, you need to respect the Indian working hours. And
nice.
This, if implemented, and if these kind of cases come up occasionally, India has such a large BPO sector.
Of course.
Yes, and these call centers work American hours, Australian hours, and UK hours.
That wouldn't make any sense from a legislation perspective. It would take out potential tons of job opportunities. That's an interesting one.
Well, this is a precedent. So if somebody from a BPO has some neurological damage or any damage, anything that he can attribute to the workplace and falling sick because of these wonky hours, working nights, he would just go into the court of law.
I'm conscious now, just trying to manage the time as well, because only a couple of minutes left. But I'm curious, managing remote work in India, I have heard anecdotes, for example, and speaking to different people have said, listen, when in India, if somebody works remotely abroad and goes over that, does that in India, you've got to be very careful the exact place of where you do it. You can't just go wherever you want. It goes back to the point you made. It depends on the state or whatnot. Can you tell us more about that?
It's India is again one of the riskiest regions in the world. There are very different taxation laws. There are very different employment labor laws. There is very different laws in every state, and it's so a lot of countries in the world are actually these changes, these different tax laws and or laws are based on regions. In India, it's also based on who you are. So like I mentioned, if you're an identified and a recognized scheduled tribe in India, personal income tax may not apply to you. No tax may be applicable to you. So you need to be also mindful of what the person or where the person is coming from or who the person is. And many, even a lot of Indian companies do not understand that. So imagine if there's an international company, perhaps the chances are they wouldn't know that. And that could land them into trouble. When it comes to, I want to be conscious, and I quickly want to touch on the EOR space. EORs are a good solution. They are not perfect, but they are the solution for overseas compliance and all sorts of overseas compliance when you want to hire people overseas or when you want to allow them to work overseas. The pitfalls of EORs is you have to become a tax resident to get on your company's payroll. If you're working from a different jurisdiction for, let's say, less than 6 months or 180 days, perhaps your company would not take you on their payroll because you're not a tax resident.
So you need to be at least 6 months. And then, so what's the ideal? Like if let's say you want to go and allow people to work from anywhere, or maybe hire from anywhere in a country. I mean, if you want to hire 20 people, employees, does an EOR make sense then, or is there a specific
Yes.
limit? Or
Yeah, no, you are. So that's again, like in Italy, on an EOR or a foreign employer payroll, there can only be 16 employees. So that there's a cap there. So if there are more than 16, you go to a different payroll provider, or you register your business as foreign entity, and then you just outsource your payroll. Or you go to a different EOR. So like I said, EOR is not the perfect solution. There's a lot of gray area, but it is the most compliant solution. And so far, like there haven't been any identifiable risk with EORs. They've been in business for many, many years.
For example, how do you manage, for example, permanent establishment? That was a remark on yesterday's episode by one or two people. How do you manage that side of it? If somebody is in a sales generating role, that kind of a high paced role, are they still a good fit for?
No, it's still taken care of because you are on a local entity's payroll. So there's no P risk there. You are not triggering anything. Even if you're executing a very high potential sales contract, you are doing it in the jurisdiction you're compliantly employed in. But you are assigned to, it's like you are assigned to work for a third party. Your operational employer, so to speak, or the client where you're working from is just your operational employer. They have no say in anything, but they just would dictate tasks to you or assign you duties to you. For all purposes, the legal employer, the EOR, is the employer. So if there's any employment-related litigation as well, it will be the EOR partner fighting it, facing it, whatever. And then they would have their separate arrangements how they're gonna ask the client to bear the cost. When it makes sense to open their own entities is when you have very, very large number. Let's say if you want to hire 100 people in India, it doesn't make sense to go for an EOR. You open your own entity, or you register if a country allows you, you register as a foreign employer and outsource your payroll. So EOR has its limitation when it comes to the number of hires you want to do, and if it's like 100 people
I'm conscious now, looking to the time as well. There's so many questions I still wanted to ask, waiting to ask, but you know what? We'll continue this conversation. I'd like to kind of tie this off. Just maybe your number one prediction to each of you for around this work from anywhere, let's say trend, this remote work trend we're seeing over the next 5 years. Maybe Becky, you might want to kick us off very, very quickly. What's your number one prediction for where this is all going to go over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think the general population, although you've got financial services that says everyone back to the office, too high risk for us. You've got the tech companies saying work from anywhere with some parameters. I think most companies are going to end in the middle with a hybrid approach. I think employees are going to start to see a year goes by, 2 years go by. Are they getting passed up for a promotion because they weren't able to make strong connections with their managers, with leaders, with other people in the organization who could be their mentors and their sponsors? And they may on their own say, oh, gee, I need to either figure out a way remotely to make those connections or really get back to the office and be more strategic about when I'm there, what I'm doing while I'm there. And not just, you're right, you hear a lot of people say, why should I bother to go in? 60% of the people aren't there. I'm just sitting in an office there by myself versus sitting at my desk at home by myself, which I'm saying, well, when you go in, you better make sure it's a value-added visit.
Yes, of course. And Brian, what about you? What's your number one prediction?
Yeah, I think I'm with Becky in the sense I see the future as being hybrid. And the reason I get there is I think that, yes, employees are definitely going to want to be working from home or working from anywhere and having flexibility. But the next generation of employees, the interns, the graduates, all the people who need the training, they're not going to get the training that, if like the current generation has had. And they're going to need to be in the office to learn what to do. And therefore, I think we're going to have situations where it is hybrid, but maybe there are office days where, your team days where your team is expected to be in so that form of personal learning can go on. But let's face it, there's been a lot of inefficiency in office work. I know there's a lot of productivity in office work, but the amount of time that is wasted with people talking about what they were doing the night before or their sports.
Of course.
You're trying to get your work done and someone's having a social conversation when you can't get your head down. So I think that will move. So I think the future is going to be hybrid. But I think the other topic, which we haven't touched on, and maybe it's for another show, but I think is going to have to be worked out over the next few years, is what happens to pay in a work from anywhere situation. And I remember the CEO of one of the big investment banks said, if you want to go and work in Colorado rather than in Manhattan, that's fine, but don't expect to be paid a Manhattan salary if you're working in Colorado.
Yeah, and you have some companies that go location independent, some don't, some basically tied to the location. Very, very good point. And last question, and then I guess that'll tie us off. You can work from anywhere in the world. Which country is it going to be, or which location is it going to be, and why? Maybe Bhagyashree, you start us off, and then Becky, and then Brian.
Well, I think most of these countries that are offering digital nomad visas would actually take the lead, because they are beautiful countries. You can have these vacations there, low cost of living, everything, all the boxes are checked. I just want to add one thing to what Brian and Becky has been saying. So I think the future would be flexibility, not in terms of location, but hours. That's mandatory. People cannot be working 9 hours. And the second thing is the world would move towards hiring contingent workforce overseas and not really hiring employees overseas. So that's a trend that have started to come up, because the compliance risks are far too many to accommodate and navigate. So yes, I think any country that is offering digital nomad visa or remote work visa would take.
And there's a number of those. Becky, would you like what would be your number one place in the world you'd love to work from, and why?
I'm not picky. I'll go anywhere as long as there's a beach and no mosquitoes. So if you can find me that, I'm there.
And Brian, what about you?
Well, I think there's also, we've talked about work from anywhere. I think there's also work from everywhere. So, you can move from one location to another. So I think we're going to see, and I know one company that does it already, is what you could almost call gap years for grown-ups, where you spend a month in one country, a month in another country, you go around the world, and everywhere you go, you have the ability to work, maybe because there's serviced accommodation, or there's good Wi-Fi, or whatever you need. So I think we're going to see that is people not just being based in one location, but actually being based in several locations.
Yeah, well, let's wait and see. Listen, thank you all so much. Thanks to all our audience for all your questions. Thank you, Becky and Brian Bhagyashree. You were wonderful guests today. Really, really appreciate it. Anyone else who's missed the show, feel free to share the link. You'll be able to, with any of your colleagues, for example, that weren't able to make it. We'll have that on social media afterwards. But for now, thank you all so much for being on today's show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.